if you could only listen to one song for an entire month, what would it be?
Stuck in a Moment by U2. I make my wife crazy with that song because she thinks that it's a statement about her. I just like the song.
Hi, I'm Dave Sherwood, the CEO of Bibliu. I'm here to introduce you to Campus Convos, the podcast where we discuss all things tech and education. Hope you enjoy it. Please subscribe on wherever you listen to your podcasts, and please give a share to others interested in the space.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Campus Convos. Joining me this week to talk about the Post-OPM world is John Katzman, founder and CEO of Noodle, also previously the founder and CEO of 2U, and the Princeton Review. So a really huge player in the edtech space, in the education space. So really excited to have John here today. We met a couple years ago. I essentially just emailed John, asked for advice. We met for a coffee at his office in New York, and it's kind of how we vaguely know each other. But great to have you here today, John.
It's great to be here, Dave.
The topic today, we're going to be talking about the post-OPM world and also network university world. So in terms of networked university, what do you mean by that, John?
Well, in a slow-moving analog world, you can kind of float on your own bottom. And universities traditionally have. They are little islands. Every so often, they do things together. A consortium of schools in Western Massachusetts or someplace else, or a university system for some state in the U.S. But in a quickly changing digital world, networks win, right? The PCs were not, were cute. And then the internet happened and they became incredibly powerful. Like the second the internet was understood by people, all of the investment went out of mainframes and larger computers because it was clear where the world was going to go. And you can look across, kind of any sector and networks win. So to me, the question for universities in the coming age is how do we collaborate at scale in a flexible way that's operational, not an association where we just get to talk about things, not a state system where we have to work with these people who are really our competitors, who are right down the road, but in a true network.
Interesting. I haven't really considered universities from that kind of network perspective before. How would a network differ from like a state system, a community college system, or some sort of a loose association of universities?
I'll give you an example of where a network is useful. And again, you could talk theory and, one guy with a cell phone, not so interesting, but when all of your friends have cell phones, then they're very interesting. Universities right now, each one markets their online programs by buying clicks and leads from Google and Facebook and LinkedIn and so forth. And only a very small percentage of those people ever enroll, right? It could be 2%. You're marketing at scale. Some number of people aren't interested. Some number of people don't get in. Some number of people who get in choose a different school. What do you do with the 98 people who don't enroll? Right? The answer is nothing. We just throw them away. And in a network, you might reach out to the students when you realize they're not going to enroll and say, well, I'm part of a network. Is there some other school that in the network that might be a better fit for you? Tell me about yourself and let's discuss. And if you can turn one of those 98 bad leads into a student somewhere in the network, you've just lowered everybody's cost of acquisition by a third. So networks happen organically when you connect it right? You have friends on, I don't know, Instagram, and they have you and other friends, and those friends have them and other friends, and it's like a fractal. I don't have to be friends with everybody, but I don't have to stand alone.
That makes sense. And the idea of using the network to share content or learning objects and whatnot, it's a really powerful one. I think a lot of people have thought would gain a lot of traction. I think the open educational resources is starting to. That's making up about 20% of adoptions now over, traditional publisher text or courseware. So there's a growing movement there. How do you think this kind of shared resource network can be accelerated such that it's more commonly used? And how do you overcome the free rider problem where everyone wants to be a member but no one wants to be a content contributor?
Well, I think that that OER and publishers, right, whether it's free or charged, have the same problem, which is if I do this, I lose my differentiation. And no one wants to be a mixed school. The extreme of that, back not that long ago, publishers talked about, courseware, right? If I get a textbook, if I adopt a textbook, it's not I don't start the course on page 1 and the last day of the course I finish chapter, 13. It's a toolbox. I want students to read chapter 2. I want them to read chapter 7, and then I'm going to do something else. And then I'm going to argue with it, right? Because, I think it's interesting, but I disagree with it. And it's just a foil for me, right? There are any number of ways to use a text. Courseware, on the other hand, I'm just now a TA. This is your course.
Right.
It's fully scripted, and I'm just there to help. And that's not interesting to a lot of professors. I don't want to be a TA. I didn't study this hard, and I didn't learn this much to give up, to cede control of my course completely to somebody else. So when you start thinking of a network approach, when you start thinking of, I'm going to share this with these guys, but not with those guys. I'm going to have just a couple of like-minded people who all have this crazy economic theory, and we're going to build out this simulation together, is where I think it scales. We all want to be part of a community, but we don't necessarily walk around naked, in a city and say, well, we're all family now. We're not all family. I choose my friends and I choose my opponents.
Interesting. And so I guess the take there is that in order to facilitate more kind of content collaboration in a network, we need a system or a platform where faculty and institutions can select who they share with and who they don't, and thereby, incentivize good behavior, which is not just taking from let's say the giant library of different learning objects, but also contributing to it as well. Yeah, super interesting. And the Corso ones are an interesting element too, because as you say, quite a lot of it is very prescriptive, but surely the end result will be tools where faculty can build their own courseware from whatever learning objects they want in the world, rather than like, here's a pre-built course that exactly covers every single day of every single week for the student. But for that to work, you need a library of easily accessible learning objects. Otherwise, it becomes pretty arduous to build your own.
And ideally, you need a library of really good ones, right? That someone's curated. If you think about 2 tiers, the first tier are people putting in really good content and other people vetting that content and making sure that it's of quality, right? And the second tier are almost like playlists. I don't get paid when somebody uses a playlist that I stuck up on Spotify, but I do it because it's relatively easy to do and it's a fun thing. And
it's for your own benefit, right?
It's for my own benefit, and then with one click, I can make it available to other people if they want to. The difference between the hard work of creating a really good interactive learning object and simply bringing together other stuff is significant. This people should either you can do it for free, or you can say, I'm going to invest in this thing. I'm going to spend X dollars building something really good. And then, if I take $1 a student for it or whatever, there's precedent in business schools who all take case studies. And I don't see any reason why, especially passing along to the students reasonable costs of really good content, we won't end up with better content. Think about free television versus all of the streaming services that have come up. And we're in this golden age of incredible content because people are willing to pay for it.
No, totally. And I was just thinking about also sort of like traditional media and how that's been disaggregated by YouTube and podcasting and things like this. Like it's almost like crowdsourcing the creation rather than just having a select few companies do 99% of it.
Best of that content tends to be at a fee. I give away something, but
yes.
But I subscribe on, Substack or wherever.
Netflix, HBO, depending what sort of media form you're talking about. Yeah,
Sure.
That's very true. But also the kind of YouTube and free podcasts are where a lot of the new creators start their careers. So it's sort of enabling more content creators to get into the mix, as well as a more diversity. In terms of thinking again on edtech and this kind of idea of a library of all of the learning objects that we could possibly mass together, we've obviously got companies like ourselves that are licensing publisher materials. We've got companies like Pressbooks, more focused in the open education resources space, and you've got specialty courseware players like a Top Hat, TA Associates, etc. Is there anyone you can think of in the space doing this kind of thing of like building a library that everyone can share from? Is it something you'd like to do at Noodle, or something you think just needs to be done?
It's something that needs to be done. I invested in 3 separate companies to try to get them to do this, and everybody eventually wanders off. The thing about entrepreneurs is they do what they want to do. It's the funny thing is everybody's worried about sharing their ideas with people. Nobody wants your ideas. They have their own ideas. And
ideas are cheap. It's all execution anyway, right?
And ideas are cheap. So the concept of a company like Biblio that already has close relationships, both on the content side and on the higher ed side in academia, this is really a fairly simple functionality, right? There's nothing I'm describing that is technologically hard, and AI makes it easier both to create interactive learning objects and to figure out where they are, like to find the thing that might be appropriate for my course to plunk in. And the piece of it that is commerce, that this particular object is free. This one is 30 cents a student, right? That the students at the beginning of a course, there are this number of objects, and so there's a $3.47 charge, and click, and it goes to their account. I think the companies with already have a lot of the base technologies in place and a lot of the connections. I think this is inevitable. The question is just who does it.
And particularly in an environment where AI is making it much cheaper to create content, whether that be a simulation or simply an image or whatever, a paragraph. So we're in this world where, because it's so easy to create the content, having this almost like a crowdsourced model, some of which is free, some of which is premium, it does seem inevitable. It's something I think the publishers are quite concerned about as well, and don't necessarily have a clear strategy as to how they tackle a market changing in this direction too.
But I think they are, and they've resisted it. But the fact is, the music companies who figured it out did fine. As that world moved from albums sold in a store to streaming to individual songs. And I think the role of a publisher to fund that object, to find the professors and others who can help build something really good, to curate it, and then share in the revenues that are generated from it. I think that's still going to exist.
No, totally, and particularly the more that we look at training people with skills and knowledge for cutting edge technology, you need to have content that's up to date and created by the knowledge leaders in the space, the academics that have come up with the new knowledge, as opposed to some of the older content, like, I don't know, fundamental mathematics, which hasn't changed in a long time. Maybe more of that will be lower cost and free, right?
Maybe, but there are three kind of vectors. One, the world changes. You need content now about teaching this that didn't even exist 5 years ago, right? You're teaching crypto or cybersecurity or quantum computing.
Mm-hmm.
There's new media. So now you're using XR instead of just print or video. And there's learning from what works and what doesn't work, that you should be watching people using your content and trying to figure out what is hitting, what isn't hitting, what's engaging users, what isn't engaging users, especially if it's interactive content, and evolving your work at least annually, if not every week. So there's no such thing in my mind as we just invested this much, it's good content, it'll be evergreen, and we never have to touch it again. Because it's not simply the content itself that needs to change.
And also, if we think about a world with peer reviews, faculty feedback, student feedback, you probably want the system to be able to incorporate that quite rapidly, whether it's like a comment or whether it's just like an edit and changing the original content to be updated. But I think your point on the music industry is a really good one. They went through pain where the total market declined and the big publishers lost revenue for a decade or so. And then since then have returned to their previous highs and are surpassing it. And those that embraced Spotify as the future business model and optimized the way they made music to that are the ones that benefited the most. And simple things like albums with more tracks seem to make them more money. The larger their catalog is, the larger percentage of the pie that they receive, because you're in a world where rather than people listening to one CD a month, they're listening to a lot of different things. And I guess I don't know if this is true, but perhaps different songs do well on Spotify than had done well on the radio. So it's sort of, to your point, is like looking at the analytics of what's doing well in the future business model, say this network here, and trying to optimize your content and your content creation processes to play with that. So it's super interesting.
There's another vector too. Two others actually come to mind when you say that. The first one is, Spotify has some real flaws, right? And it turns out that there's sort of like this filler music that can be created inexpensively and crappily that will get titrated in because the economics are somebody's going to stumble on it, has the right name, has the right metrics. How do you enforce a marketplace, right? That your content really is good, and academia, I think, is going to be a more thoughtful client than Spotify users, right? It's a smaller market, but it's a fiercer one. But the second thing is, what the new media has been all about is micro-targeting. And in the mind of Gates and others, Gates Foundation, we don't need all these economics professors. We're just going to have this great econ courseware and econ 101, and we can all just take that. And that's nonsense, right? The smarter publishers will say, I'm going to build this content for this kind of student and this kind of school, and I'm not going to be the mediocre answer for everybody. I'm going to be the perfect answer for that. And I think what you'll see is many more modules than you would think you need, but that are aware of really who they're best for.
Yeah, that makes sense. Where, like, even to the maths example, even if you're teaching the same sort of applied mathematics to a variety of different student bases, like you need to teach it differently depending on the institution, the demographic, and things like this. Makes sense. And in this kind of world where you have a huge library of learning objects, if people are pre-building courses, certain publishers, Gates Foundation, whoever, you really want the tech to be able to enable professors to pick and choose bits of it and pick and choose bits of other things, and ultimately, therefore, create completely custom courses based on what they want to teach and what they think is the right thing. And what about like the adoption of technology? Do you think that will change? Because we've seen higher education, it is, compared to other sectors, can be a little slow to change and adopt new technology, although clearly there are some technologies that have been very widely adopted now. Do you think, specifically if we're thinking about this network and this content space, do you think there'll be a change in the rate of adoption?
I do. First, I was heartened by higher ed's response to the pandemic, that it moved forcefully, get kids off campus, move to distance learning. It didn't do a great job with it. I'd give it a B minus, C plus, but it was in the game, right? Like colleges barely skipped a beat in the US and the UK. Whereas K-12 really, here at least, sucked wind, just
The same in
disastrous
the UK.
performance. And I think higher ed was every bit as agile as any leading company, right? In terms of thoughtfulness on this stuff. So it can use technology, and right now AI is being used broadly by both students and faculty in higher ed. And you can see that from OpenAI's volume in the summer versus in the spring and fall, right? Businesses are still going. It's academia that is not there. So I actually think that higher ed gets a little bit of a bum rap on its adoption of technology. It's not great at some of the tech it uses, like SISs and LMSs, kind of big iron. But most companies have moved off that stuff. Everybody hated that software. Way back in the day, the software in your company was much more advanced than the software you used at home. Now, it's the reverse. The stuff you do online is infinitely more sophisticated than anything specific to corporations or to academia.
And you could probably extend that analogy to students versus universities and faculty in their own kind of private software usage compared to whatever the university is providing. I hadn't really thought of that analogy. It's a really good one. And jumping on then to the students themselves, how do you think, because we talk a lot about the benefit to the faculty here in creating better content, creating more customized content, creating content in new media like XR. What do you think the benefits to the students are? And particularly in a realm where students may think, oh, we're all moving to this kind of Gates Foundation, teaching associate, but we're all learning the same economics course wherever we study. Like, what is the benefit to the student in this like network content space?
So there are two ways to think about adaptivity, because I think it's thought of incorrectly by a ton of people. The first vector is we're all going to learn in this course, not worldwide, but in this course, we're all going to learn the same thing. But we all come at it with different strengths and weaknesses. How do I create an adaptive experience for you through this course while still having the social functionality that is why we do higher ed, right? That is sort of the whole point of collaborative learning and interactivity and exchange. And my feeling is, having seen a whole bunch of things that didn't work, the only thing that really works is we're meeting together on Wednesday. Next week, we're all going to come together again. In between those two, your experience might be very different. So getting ready for this class, I can, as a software person, I can figure out what you know that you need to know and where I need to help you, even if that's some 5th grade skill that you just don't happen to have. I can go back and teach it to you. I can get you to the starting gate of that class ready to learn. And then after it, in the assessment and then in getting you ready for the next week, I can again set a different path. So if you think about points, and each point from here to here, we're each doing our own way through, that's pretty exciting.
And each of us is finding like our own path of least resistance, like the most efficient way for us to get there.
Yeah, that takes into account what you already know and what you're and how you like to learn and so forth, and how deep you want to go in some cases. But then the second path is that we might not all want to learn the same thing. And both from school to school, but also potentially from student to student within a class. And the ability for a professor to start saying, we're all doing Econ 101, but some people are really, really interested in this part of it, and we can go deep there. We can have a great time and play with each other, and some other people can go do a different activity. In the same way, again, the case studies in business school, we're studying different cases, we're pursuing different things. We're all learning the same basic skills, but we're learning them in a different way and focusing in different areas.
And I guess that's also an opportunity for the faculty and institution to apply their own flavor and context, maybe a particular research area. That's a really interesting way to frame it. And ultimately, if it works, then the student ends up with better outcomes, whether that be grades, whether that be number of students retained or passing the courses and these kind of things. So yeah, that makes sense. And what about, and we've talked about the pandemic and obviously digital learning resources. What do you think the on-campus experience will be like, the physical experience will be like in like 10 years, 20 years time, as opposed to the online experience? Like what role does that fulfill, particularly if we think of a world where increasingly the actual learning and content and teaching is all more online?
So I am obsessed by Apple stores, right? When they announced them, we all thought they were kind of showrooms and, beautiful, right? But like showroom. And actually, if you go to a Google store or Microsoft store, they kind of are. Apple stores are the highest grossing stores per square foot in the country, in the US, and I believe worldwide. They are 40 or 50% more revenue per square foot than Tiffany.
Wow.
And 100% more than number 3, right? They're like wildly better at being stores than any other store on earth. And you got to say, why are they so good at that? Like what they're selling isn't that expensive. There are plenty of people like Tiffany selling much more expensive things. And I believe it's that they really understand this is what you do online and this is what you do in the store. This is why we're here. When you walk in, we're not saying, for instance, in higher ed, you could take this class online or you could take this class by coming in and sitting in a room, right? It's not simply a replacement. It is the unique contribution of the real world to your feeling, to your learning, and to your feeling of well-being. So I think, you're seeing some trend lines. More and more online learners live within bicycle distance of campus. Why is that? I mean, it's like 70+% in the US. And I believe that what the market is signaling to universities is that we've got to move to a much more agile approach. We don't have online and on-ground students, and we don't have flex courses or flex programs that you can do either. It's
most students want both. Or like
most students want
Bits of both, I suppose. Yeah.
That's right, bits of both.
Yeah.
Right? I want to do this. I want the things that I can do online better. I want to do
Yeah.
online, and the things that I can't do anywhere but when I can smell and touch and see people. If it's going to a football game, if it's a cocktail party, if it's a guest speaker and some event on campus, if it's any number of things that get me to campus, because these campuses are all very beautiful and well located because the towns grew up around them. How do you use those facilities to do what online will never do?
And you're thinking like flipped classroom, where the teaching focused more about smaller groups and actually Q&A and like trying to help them with their individual questions and journeys, collaboration, student to student, socialization, as opposed to just like, here's a lecture, I'm going to read to you for an hour, and you could you could watch a video instead, kind of thing.
I think those are table stakes as a starting point. Of course, like, lectures are generally less effective than any number of ways of getting that content out. Although we still go to plays.
Yeah.
Right? And they're different from movies, and they fill a different part of us, a different part of our soul. So there's a place even for a lecture in kind of how I want to ingest content or how I want to engage content. But I think we see a lot more movies than we do plays.
And increasingly at home, the cinemas are kind of struggling as well, right?
That's right. But I think that's just a starting point. I think the flipped classroom was fine, and the notion of a lecture, we can do better. But even the 8-person seminar where we're talking about things could be done online better and better. What can't be done online? Anything involving the socialization part, which we can weigh that. Oh, those are soft skills, or oh, those are social. That's not why we're here. Of course it's why you're here. You ask anybody, I'll ask you, what % of what you took away from college, from your undergraduate years, happened in a classroom? Of what stuck with you, of what changed you as a human?
It's a great question. And largely, some of it was like labs and small group learning, but mostly like who I met, events I attended. Yeah, the people-to-people things, particularly with friends, as in people that I just met, right, as opposed to like my teacher or my peer group, person or whatever.
I've asked that of hundreds of people, and generally it comes in around 25% is classroom, 75% is everything else. So that's 75% we should embrace. We shouldn't like give it the back of the hand. That's why higher ed is so powerful.
And do you think in a world of like increasing levels of student debt and graduate salaries not increasing at the same rate, do you think that's enough? The kind of not outside of the classroom value is enough to justify studying? And do you think that there'll be a kind of reckoning where if the debt keeps increasing relevant to the graduate salaries, at some point dramatically less students do higher ed?
Higher ed has two problems. One is a cost problem, which is not the cost disease described years ago by Bowen and Baumol. It's the cost of teaching has actually been flat to inflation for decades because of what you just said. Teaching salaries haven't gone way up, and schools are using more TAs and adjuncts and less ladder faculty.
Larger classes sometimes too.
And sometimes larger classes. That has not been why higher ed is expensive. The cost of student services and academic support has been growing wildly faster than inflation. Some of it driven by regulation, some of it driven by different kinds of students who we're attracting and their needs, and some of it just bureaucracy and bad management. The solving student services and academic support as part of embracing kind of an agile approach to learning and your students being off campus as often as they're on campus is, I think, a critical job of higher ed, and again, where networks could be really helpful. At the same time, though, higher ed in the US has a huge perception problem. The actual net tuition paid in the US has been flat to inflation for over 20 years.
Is that right?
Yeah, so when you Google, cost of college, you see these charts where...
Yeah, but it's not taking into account scholarships.
What schools have been doing increasingly is price segmentation, right? Which everybody does. The next time you're on a plane, everybody paid a different price for their seat, right? But airlines advertise their least expensive seat. And it's only higher ed that advertises their most expensive seat.
But isn't student debt increasing rapidly? So doesn't that imply that people are spending more relative to inflation year on year, the last, 20 years?
In the US, and I think this is true of the UK as well, the public subsidy of education has been reduced on a per student basis by a lot. In the US, public universities, and most students go to public universities, it used to be 75% paid by the state, 25% paid by the student.
So the net spend is much the same, but the students are taking more debt
the students are taking on.
The state.
And I think the way we fund education leads to that. But in the US, if states subsidized education the way they did 20 or 30 years ago, student debt would be dropping, not rising. So we have to decide. What we're doing right now is unsustainable and sort of bad for everybody. We have to decide how we're going to fund education more intelligently at the same time as schools really do have to take their student services and academic support costs and bring them under control.
Yeah, so tackle the cost side and also the revenue side, which I guess is partly like the state's
and the perception side.
Yeah, actually, it's a really good point. And do you think both, it seems like the Democrats and Republicans both sort of agree that there needs to be focus on the cost or debt versus, average salary coming out. The Democrats are talking about gainful employment and essentially holding schools accountable statistically to the average salaries versus the debt of the graduates. And then Republicans are talking about debt share, where the colleges would have to help pay some of the unpaid debts. I was reading a little about it today. Do you think either of those policies make any positive difference in terms of specifically your point around inefficiencies?
They do. What's funny? Marketplaces in education, I spend a lot of time thinking about. And here's what's so hard. How many restaurants have you been to in your life?
I don't know. Hundreds, I guess.
Hundreds easily, probably 1,000 or more.
Yeah.
So if I ask you about some restaurant that you just were in, and you say, it is unbelievable, the food's beautiful and great, and the service is great, I'm going to take your word for it because I know that there's a context to that statement.
Yeah.
Higher ed, how many undergraduate colleges did you go to? 2. Okay, well, that's one more than me.
I didn't finish the second one. I dropped out the second time.
Got it. It's so hard to actually measure if a school is good or bad because so many people have so few data points. And the collection of uninformed data is not itself informed. So people are not very good consumers because there's not very good information as to, is this major smart? Is this when I switch majors and I lose a whole bunch of credits, or I switch schools and I lose twice that many, the advisement isn't great, but it's not that there aren't good advisors. It's that we just don't even have a language to talk about, to an 18-year-old, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And you can approach that with a very kind of top-down, you can't offer this program anymore because it leads people to a bad outcome. Or the school itself is going to pay something if the outcomes continue to be bad. But whether I buy into either one of those two answers or I try to find a third, this is a problem that really has to be addressed. Like the people who as a kid, you're just doing some stuff that's going to end up with you paying off student debt for the next 20 years. We need some intervention of some sort.
Combined with the incentive side. Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting you say the perception. I hadn't really thought of it too much, but in the UK, there's this national student survey. Everyone has to fill in this survey and they sort of rank their own institution. But there's a really common issue they have, which is exactly what you said, where obviously almost all of them haven't been to other universities. And so you look at something objective, like in our space, how much is the library spending on books each year? How many books are in the library, digitally, physically, whatever. And objectively, you get an institution that's done more, but getting a worse content score, worse library score. And they think it's because students at certain institutions with particularly prestigious ones, just rank that institution more highly based on their kind of view of the brand. And also they're kind of proud to be there and things like this. So, yeah, it's really interesting that the consumers are not, as you say, that they lack information as to the quality of the alternatives.
It's really hard, and I worked on this at Princeton Review, and we did guidebooks and surveyed hundreds of thousands of students a year to try to get a handle on this. But you end up in the following situation: if you, well, your kids are younger, if you had a 16, 17-year-old and who's thinking about college, and I assemble the 10 best counselors in the US to advise her. And she described herself for 10 minutes, and then each one of them said, here are three, wrote down the names of 3 schools that she should consider that might be a good fit. Right? So you got 10 counselors and each one writing down 3 schools and putting them in a pile. How many schools are going to end up on that pile? Is it going to be, they're all great counselors. They all chose exactly the same 3 schools. There are 3 schools, those are the ones. Or is it going to be closer to 30 that each one has proposed 3 completely different schools from the others?
Definitely closer to 3.
The more experienced a counselor is, the more closer it gets to 30. It generally comes out around 15 or 20 that you think you're going to see in that group. And obviously, if you've got an outlier kid and she's like a brilliant scientist and mathematician, and there are a handful of great schools that are going to pop up, kind of repeatedly. But for the most part, this stuff is pretty nuanced, and figuring out what the right answer isn't about where you get in or even where you'll complete. Right? It is a counselor sort of knowing, yeah, I had a kid a lot like you who went to that school but hated it, and but went to this school and loved it, and it's all pattern recognition, but looking at real outcomes, not at just the economics or just the first year retention.
All vibes, yeah. It's super interesting. Also, partly I think the human brain struggles with more than 4 or 5 alternatives as well, and often we kind of coalesce around the same 4 or 5 options for any given product or service. So, John, I'm going to wrap it up there, but really appreciate your time today. I'm sure you've got many other things that you could be doing. And thanks everyone for jumping on and listening today. Please subscribe or drop us a review on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening to this. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
It's great seeing you, Dave. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, John.